It's time again at 7-Eleven trademark okay, it's just June 18th of 2000, year of our Lord 2017, for another one of my supposedly brief but extremely not brief rundowns of a personally experienced ghost story or whatever. By the way, this is like the best tea. You get it over at Universe. It's like, it's really strong. It's a tasty tea. I really like that tea. In case you cannot tell already, I am just a little bit, I woke up at like 3 a.m. last night, like feeling like sick as hell, probably from this like pork belly that had been in the fridge too long that I made, and I put it on a pizza, and in fact, the half of that pizza with the pork belly on it is in the fridge right now. And like all day I've been kind of like, I'm like, do I go in for that pizza? Do I like pick off the pork belly? Do I just assume that maybe like it wasn't the pork belly and something else made me sick? I wonder. But I'm not. I don't think I'm going to touch it because it was really like I was just miserable last night. It was horrible. Anyway, so that got me up at 3 a.m. And then I went back to bed and kind of woke up at like 8ish, feeling like better, but still whatever. So from 8 till now, like 7 o'clock, like I went out, took JoJo, who either you know JoJo at this point. So if you are stumbling upon this video, then sorry, I haven't introduced myself. I probably won't. Yeah, no, I won't. And you'll probably see JoJo at some point. He's roaming around. But yeah, so I took JoJo out, and then I went to stores, places, went and got pork cutlets for curry. I'm just finished up the curry right now. It's cooling in the other room. If I was actually capable of simple editing on this, rather than simply hitting the record button and then calling it a day, I can't do much of anything else. You'd probably actually catch me stop and have dinner. But that's not going to happen. No. And then I went and took JoJo right back out after I got back, and that was at 4:34. So JoJo's been basically roughhousing for the past 4, 5, 6, 7, that entire time. He's been engaged in a non-stop wrestling match, like with at least 4 different dogs, like the whole time, just like it's wild. Oofa doofa. So like my head's not like totes, like all up in what I'm doing right now. But hey, whatever. It's a story. It's an oral history. You kind of get like the image of like what the person is like at the same time as they tell you the story about like what happened to them and what their experiences were and so on. So I figured, hey, I'll muscle through it. Maybe I'll find my stride. Maybe I'll come up with something else to talk about. Yeah. Got my tea. JoJo's asleep because he's been playing for like 4 hours or something like that. So the last story was basically about how nothing happened. We just ended up getting chased down by like a farmer with his dogs on effectively the introductory experience of going ghost hunting in Ventura, California. So the like a subsequent time, like basically after that, we became obsessed. We just wanted to like go all over the place, go wherever we could find something. And so like I got a bunch of books and I started like looking up like stories. And this is back in like 2003, 2004, or thereabouts, like somewhere around then. Maybe it was like this was back in high school. So this is like 2001, 2002. I got a computer in like 2002. Like my family got one for the first time. You know, this is back in the day of like dial-up and stuff like that. So we like, you know, that's when I got the internet, and I like there wasn't. I bet I could look up all sorts of stuff right now about Haunted Ventura and like ghosts in Ventura and stuff like that, and like supposed stories and so on. And oh my god, I'm sure if I like, there's like a remote possibility that if I looked it up, maybe there would even be stuff from or like related to me and my friends going out and about, because like we end up like meeting a lot of people and talking to a lot of people and got a lot of like the stories like got out. Oh, my eyes! Oh, I'm all... So who knows? I haven't like looked anything up because like why the fuck would I care? I'm not going ghost hunting in Ventura. I'm in northern Japan. Like I try to find ghost stories about it up around here, and it's all just weird shit like, you know, hand that hangs from a tree on a red like string, like old lady that goes from door to door in winter, and she knocks on the door and asks for a type of really, really tasty sweet sake that's like basically just like a kind of a milky, like really low alcohol, like, oh man, it's really good. It's kind of like a holiday drink thing, and I get the impression that like some people kind of like it, but this is in the same way that I like mead. Like I love mead, but like a lot of people are just like, mead is revolting. Mead is too sweet. And I'm just like, I drink Coca-Cola, so fuck you. But anyway, so this like old lady like knocks on the door. It's just like, oh, could you share this like winter sake with me? And it's like, don't open the door. If you open the door, you're fucked. And it's just like, I love Japanese ghost stories because a lot of them have like a lot of their like resolutions, or like where you would put in a moral is like there isn't one. It's like there's a randomness to it, kind of like, oh, you hear a sound behind you, and so long as you don't turn around, like you're fine, because like the ghost like would get like embarrassed and kill you for like looking at it, but otherwise it's like super chill and friendly, and it kind of likes you and stuff like that. Which reminds me, if you're watching this, I highly recommend, if you haven't already, watching the anime series Mushishi. Mushishi, Mushi, is excellent. It's just fantastic. It's so good. I personally actually really like the dub of that one, though I'm sad that only the first season is dubbed and not the second one. Gotta get my headroom. Anyway, but so I haven't looked to see, like, back when I was going ghost hunting back then, I had to, like, find books, like physical books, and get stories from people because there was no websites or anything dealing with it at the time that I could find. And so, you know, I was kind of out of luck. And even then, like, fuck, man, like, using Google Maps, there was no fucking Google Maps. There was, like, barely a mapping, like, I don't think there was... What the fuck were you using to map anything back then? Like, we were using, like, actual maps. When I was a pizza delivery guy a few years later, I was just, like, I had a book that I would take out and, like, I'd memorize, like, streets and, like, all the different, like, ways that streets would go together. And sometimes you'd get, like, an order to, like, some random-ass place where you'd, like, look at the names on the streets and be like, okay, like, that one sounds like this other one that's in this other area, and since the whole city is like a big mirror of itself with similarly named streets that are all in alphabetical or numeric order, then like... Anyway. Like, it would be hard to find places, so you'd like open up a book and read a ghost story, and all of a sudden it'd be like, it's like, oh, this took place out in fucking... like Miller's Creek, and you're just like, where's Miller's Creek? And then you're like looking at like maps and like opening, like going through all these other maps and like trying to find like, oh, there's a road here. It says Miller's Creek, but it's like 15 miles long. Okay, well, where on there is there a creek? And then you find the creek, and you're just like, okay, and it says that it's supposed to happen at a bend in the creek, and then you got to go up into the woods. It is actually, come to think of it, it is amazing that I was not, get like bit by snakes and shit like that. Like, oh man, I gotta tell a story sometime about hiking up over to Two Trees and how me and my friend Owen completely fucked that up. And yeah, that was a mess. There was a cougar den and rattlesnakes and horse bites. That was a bad day. Fun day, bad day. But anyway, so one of the early times that we decided to go ghost hunting, like, and this all was happening like week by week, where every like Friday, Saturday, or whenever, we'd just be all like, what are you doing tonight? Hey, you want to go ghost hunting? Let's go ghost hunting. We get like super hyped up and stuff like that, because we're teenagers, and at the time, like, the economy like was okay, and like there wasn't a constant like pervasive sense of like doom hanging on the horizon. Though I swear, I was the doom prophet. I was the one that was just like, I'm like, man, this whole college thing and the economy, I don't know, I feel like everything's kind of going to go to fly into pieces. It feels unsustainable somehow. Well, look at me now, living in Japan. Drinking tea, watching the world burn to the ground, talking about ghosts on the internet. Anyway, so one of the like early times that we went out was in pursuit of so there's two different stories that had to relate to Creek Road and Old Creek Road. These were, so previously in another like video I'd mentioned that there's Ojai, which is just past Ventura, like up this like windy like kind of countryish road, and that's where all the like Klan and like neo-Nazis are out in the woods. But so like Creek Road and Old Creek Road were two different like streets that like ran off like, and I think Creek Road goes up further than Old Creek Road. I think Old Creek Road kind of like, no, Old Creek Road goes up like and actually can connect up with other stuff, and I think Creek Road like is short. But so there was these stories about this like a girl who died. They always do. That's the tragic thing about like old ghost stories. It's always a girl, and she always dies, and then she haunts a spot somewhere. So in this case, she was supposed to haunt a bridge crossing, and she would like walk across the bridge at a specific hour, like randomly. There's also stories about like old Indian motorcycles. People would describe seeing like a motorcycle riderless just like cruising down like the old like the highway there, the 30. I want to say that's the 33. I think the 33 is the one that runs from like you take the 101 up the coast towards Santa Barbara, and then you'd see the turnoff for the 33 that goes up to Ojai, and you take that and follow that up. Anyway, so like it's supposed to be stories of like an old like motorcycle that like just would cruise up and down and would like disappear, and you'd see it, and there would be just like a motorcycle with no one on it. There was also my favorite, like my real favorite that we never went looking for because it's, come on, it's not a real story. Like nothing, this isn't real. Like some of these things could be all like, I'm like, oh, maybe something happened there. Like maybe this is related to something. Maybe there's an actual like event or experience that's happening that's created this story. But some stuff is literally just like, no, that's not real. So my favorite one is that up somewhere at one of these crossroads that had been eventually turned into like real streets, but back in the day it was like just an old crossroad, was a casket with a glass screen over where the face was, and that buried, or not buried, but like entombed in this casket and then hidden out in the woods away from this crossroads, was a Spanish vampire who'd come over from Spain when the missions were being built, and was basically like killed and like killed by locals, and like kept in his like casket and like hidden away in the woods, like back in like the like 19th century or something like that. Who he'd been like preying on like the towns and things like that for like 200 years, like out in the Ohio area, and finally his reign of terror was ended. You know, a Southern California Castlevania, and that his casket was like guarded by a great enormous black dog that would, you know, like attack anyone that came nearby. And I was just like, I'm like, that's so cool. Like how many like towns have such a like a hot take on the vampire like lore? Like, okay, like maybe you've got like a story of there's like, oh, there's a vampire that lived out there, just like whatever. This is like it's like an old Spanish duke turned out to be a vampire, and he snuck out west like on like merchant vessels to go and like prey upon the Catholic priests that were like that were colonizing the West Coast. And I'm like, that is like, there are layers to that story that are so good. And so the other story from Old Creek Road, was of Charman, which in my mind there was like, I always thought of like, made him think of like a hamburger, like get some char on him. All right, put some chili on it. It's a Charman. But the story there's like, oh man, there's like 5-10 different versions of this story, and hell, I would argue that this is an archetypical story where you find this style of story like all over the United States, probably all over Europe, like basically any place where people like congregate and have cars. But the story goes that, you know, well, one of the story goes is that, okay, so the framework of the story is there's a man, he's in the woods, there is a car with some other people. Now, either that car hits his car, or it's a car parked someplace and he approaches it. Something happens where he gets lit on fire. Basically, it's either he's harassing a couple, like out in the woods, like he's a pervert, or he was in a horrible accident with his girlfriend. Again, it's like there's a girl in the story, so she has to die. And then he was horribly disfigured in the fire, and he like. So, of course, in the story, it ends up being like the 20 different variations. There's like, of course, the different ways that it goes, where either he dies horrifically in a fire, you know, like making the sound of ultimate suffering as like the flames consume him, or, you know, he crawls out from his Cadillac as it's like engulfed in flames, and he's like, his skin's falling off, and he's just like, I know what I'll do. I'll fucking go into the woods and live like a monster for 50, 60 years, because these, you know, it just scabs over and then you're fine. I don't need a doctor. I'm driven mad by pain. I had Taco Bell earlier, and I was seeing if that was still cold or even had anything in it. It doesn't. Except ice melt. But so Charman was like a story where, you know, you'd go out late at night and you'd park somewhere like on the road, like, or like you'd go off to like, you know, Dead Man's Curve or Makeout Point. There was lots of fucking like, Ventura was chock full of those kinds of places where it's just like, that's where like you go to fucking make out. And I'm like, man, these places are so obviously places where you go to make out. It's a wonder that you didn't end up like having like the police like tooling around them like 24/7, being like, get the fuck out of here, stop making out in your car, and like next to this gigantic goddamn cross. It was over a hill. But anyway, so you'd park out there and you'd go to like neck your girl, who'd die, of course. and then like Charman would like come bursting out of like the like tree line and be all like, "No, I was disfigured. Call an ambulance. I've been out here for 40 years. I don't know what I'm eating, and I don't know how I survived this. Oh, these burns. Fuck." But so Charman's obviously horseshit. Like, so the only story amongst those where I was just like, I'm like, we should at least check it out and see what we can get is the girl. The fact of the matter is that part of me is kind of hoping that, like, because of how many ghost stories all take place, like, in and around Ojai, that maybe, just maybe, the region was, like, maybe, like, I wouldn't necessarily say psychically charged, but, like, maybe that the reason there were so many ghost stories was that things actually were happening there, and that like people were making up weird shit to like attach to relatively like unique but benign events. And so there we go. Since it's mirrored, I'm like, what? But so I decided to go up and kind of like look in the general area where I noticed that like 4 or 5 different stories all happened in like, they're all very different, but they all happen in the same like mile stretch of road. And I'm like, that's where we should go and look. We should go late at night. Ojai always seemed kind of like abandoned, like there wasn't like a lot of like traffic or anything like that. So we figured that we'd just like go out and like it was one of the side roads that's especially not like well trafficked. And so we went out. Josh's pickup truck, which is, you know, a little white pickup truck that was like super itty bitty tiny. So I'm like cramped in the middle. And we drive out, park. We cross the bridge where you're supposed to like find the girl, and the idea is that you cross the bridge, and then like somewhere on that bridge you should hit a cold spot or run into a girl or hear a sound or, you know, who knows what. So we get out and we kind of split up, and it's not like split up, like we're all staying around the road, but we're like kind of like going like out in different directions, and like Brandon and Josh, at this point, Brandon had like a ton of airsoft guns and knives. Like, he collected the hell out of knives. And so, like, they're armed to the teeth. I'm not. Because, what? Like, there's no wild animals. What's a coyote going to get me? Like, there's cougars, but they're not going to be out. Like, am I supposed to fight a raccoon? Like, whatever. They were convinced that they could like shoot a ghost with an airsoft gun, and that would do something. I don't know. Holding a fake gun like really made them feel a lot better about themselves, and so why not let them do it? Like, go nuts. So long as they stayed doing it and like kept us like progressing out into the woods, because they tended to kind of like panic a bit and want to like go back to the car. But anyway, so it was a nice night. It was dark. It was dark as hell. And we were out, like, wandering around. I crossed over the bridge and crossed back looking. And as we came back from the bridge, the car was, like, the truck off the side of the road, like, up the ways a little bit. We all of a sudden heard rustling in the brush next to us. We're like, oh. Like, what's that? Like, we were like looking around, we were like, what? Something's coming out of something's coming out of the bushes. And so we like stop and we like shine our flashlights on the bushes. And in my mind, I'm expecting, you know, like maybe like a deer, like some sort of wild animal, something cool like that. And like the brush like up on the hills, like kind of, you know, like shaking. And it's like coming down, like it's like getting all shaken like around kind of it like closer and closer, and like so it's like us standing back, like the brush is like over here, the truck's up ahead, It's all like it's all like wrestling and whatnot. And then like Josh and Brandon take off. And I assume that they're just trying to, like get closer to the truck because they feel safer around it. So they run past up to the truck as this is like happening, and I stay back to like shine a light on like the bushes because I want to see what's happening. So I get in close and like I'm standing there, I'm shining a light on these bushes, and the bushes are all shaking, and then the bushes open up and there's nothing there, and the bushes slam shut. And then across the road, like directly, like if you went down the hill and then across the road and then over to the next bushes, those bushes open up and then like start shaking like down the hill. So literally like it would be like an invisible deer had just like cascaded like down the hill through the trees across the street and like out the other side. And then I look up when Josh and Brandon are in the truck, and Josh has turned on the truck, and Josh is driving away. So I have to like run up and leap back into the back to like get with them before they leave me at the bridge because they freaked out. Which is funny because they ran when it was just a sound up on the hill, and they thought it might be like a cougar coming to eat them or something like that. I'm like, guys, if you'd stayed behind for even like a few seconds more, he would have seen something crazy. I'm like, something came out of the bushes, crossed the road, and disappeared, and there was nothing there. Like, invisible deer? Like, what is that? Like, it wasn't a little girl, like, crossing a road. It wasn't Charman. Like, but what made the bushes open up? What, like, crossed the street and then disappeared down the other side? That was never even there in the first place. Like, it was super duper bizarre. So we like tooled up the road a little bit. Like I hop back in, and we sit down. We're just like, okay, like what are we going to do next? Like where are we going to go? And we decide that the next spot that we would try, we would do like we do one of the big ones that we like really speculated about, which was there was a story. Or there was a few stories all about Sulphur Mountain. And Sulphur Mountain is just like there's a bunch of hills all around Ventura, mountains. There's like mountains all around Ventura, all around the north side, and like they're all really more or less hills, but like they're the only like major geographical like objects like anywhere nearby. So for example, when I went to Seattle and would look off into the horizon and see Mount Rainier, I'd be like, Jesus Christ, that's a great big fucking mountain. Like even here I'm like fucking Hakoda and like Mount Awate and things like that. Like those are big mountains, but compared to like the mountains back home in Ventura, like those were kind of more like hills, but it's spirit counts. So there's all sorts of weird stories about Sulphur Mountain. Like there were stories about like of course a number of like Charman stories all take place in Sulphur Mountain. But one of the big ones that you saw like coming up like over and over again was the story of that there was this horrible criminal back in like the 1870s, 1880s. There's this horrible criminal in Ventura who lived up in the hills, and that he was being like, the town basically had gotten sick of his shit and was like out to get him, and he was riding away from a posse that was going to hang him. And as he was riding up the trails towards the top of Sulphur Mountain, he did not notice, because it was late at night, a low-hanging branch and decapitated himself. And so the story goes that this horrible murderer rapist was like on a horse, like a headless horseman, like was like roaming around the hills late at night, like menacing people and like generally being a ghostly nuisance. And so we were out looking, because this story shows up in a lot of books, and it comes up relatively often when you talk to people. Like a lot of people talk about the headless horseman on Sulphur Mountain. And so we we find Sulphur Mountain because it's off the main roads and kind of like up through this like small neighborhood. And like the other weird thing too is that when I started going to Ojai during the daytime, like I didn't know where anything was. Like I'd figured out like where lots of stuff was in the dead of night. Like I would pick things out like by like certain like turnoffs and how like stuff looked in like the dim light. But once it was daytime, I'm like, oh, it's up over. I didn't know. It looks different when there's no light. But anyway, so like you eventually come up and like get up this road, scoots along for a while with no houses around. And so Josh pulls up, turns the car around, faces it back out, because in Josh's mind he thought that okay, if we set it up and we have to get out, we can drive straight without having to turn the car around. And next to it, so as you're going up, on the left side is a Boy Scout camp, which was unused at the time, but was just at the foot of the mountain. The Boy Scouts would meet up there and go and hike around the hills and whatnot and earn badges, whatever the fuck, make knots, I don't know, learn archery. I don't know what Boy Scouts do. And so, I don't know, it was maybe 50 yards from where the truck was, along this little paved road up to a cattle guard and a gate. And the gate's basically just don't ride your horses. It was either don't ride your horses between these hours, or if you're going to ride your horses, don't, I don't know, clean up after them. Staple your horse's butt shut. Don't let it poop. There's cattle guards and stuff like that, because I guess there was a lot of ranches and free roaming horses and cattle and stuff like that out in these hills, and there's fencing around other parts, but the main roads they had cattle guards, and so late at night, very dark out again. This time we have flashlights, mind you, because this was relatively early on, and we were just we've got flashlights, we can use flashlights, we can see where we're going. We go through, you can swing the fence, the fence has a pedestrian gate to it, so you can just walk through that. So we cross through that, and we start up this dirt trail that's climbs this mountain up and around. And I have to admit, we don't get very far. We're walking, and Brandon and Josh are just there oh, this is super duper creepy. It's pitch black out. We don't know what's around. We can only shine so much with our flashlights. There's no moon out. We should maybe cut and run on this and just get out of here, because it's kind of getting kind of creepy out. And for me, I was just I'm like, this is indeed kind of creepy, because it's fucking the middle of night, in the woods, on this dirt trail, and you're out looking for a headless horseman, where the stories go that you smell an intense wafting of sulfur, and then you hear galloping horses and all these things, and doom is upon you. But I also pointed out to guys, I'm like, there's a cattle guard that tells us that there's cattle to keep from roaming out into the road. The name of the mountain is Sulphur Mountain, which implies that there is hot springs or thermal vents that are releasing sulfur or tar or something out that will produce the sulfur smell. So you can only assume that the smell of sulfur is less to do with a ghost suddenly appearing, creating the smell, and more to do with, the actual geology of the mountain itself. Sulphur Mountain was probably Sulphur Mountain before there was ever, if ever, a headless horseman to begin with. Suffice it to say, signs didn't help them. And so mostly what kept them on the trail and going ahead was that they'd slow down and I'd keep walking. So I'd hit a point where I'm like, 30, 40, maybe 50 feet ahead of them, and they're like talking to each other about like going back, and they're like they're like, Chris, we should maybe like go back to the car, like, I don't know, there's like maybe like go get some food someplace or something. I hear Denny's is open. I'm like, no guys, we gotta keep going. Like, we're not coming off this mountain until we either like get super tired of climbing up it or we find something. And they'd be like, okay, and then they'd like come up after me, and then I'd push on another like 50 to 100 feet, and then they'd be like, we can't leave Chris behind. And then they'd follow me up a little bit further. So we get not too deep into the mountain, but like up and towards a curve on it, when all of a sudden we all get this like kind of like ill feeling, stronger than like just the nervousness that was already accompanying the entire experience. And the way that my friends always tell it, they always say that there was a great whinnying of a horse, which completely not true. Like, that never happened. Like, there was no whinnying of a horse. I don't know where they got the idea from. I don't know why they always say it. They always tell the story and they always throw that in. It never happened. What happened was that all of a sudden, you get the strong smell of sulfur. There's, of course, tar pits all over the place. They get anxious about continuing up the mountain. So I go ahead and I say, I'm like, okay. So I'm like, let's say that there is like something here. Let's stop, turn, and start walking back down the hill. And we will call it a night. And we'll just like go back. Like, we've gone a long way up. We've got the sulfur smell. At the very least, maybe there's like a hazard somewhere nearby, and we should just start making our way back down. And as we turn and start to slowly make our way back down the hill, nervously, with just Brandon and Josh like eyes like ahead, we'd like reach a point, and that sulfury smell would kind of catch up to us. Now, the whole way up, there was no sulfur smell. It was just the whole way up. We stopped when the sulfur smell started. Now, all of a sudden, the sulfur smell was keeping pace with us. We stopped, and this was when it got peculiar. We'd stop and turn and shine a light back up, and a fog bank had begun to roll in. And it was enshrouding the path that we'd taken up in fog. It was making it difficult to see. And so we're like, oh, fog, coming in off the mountain. Like, Ventura has its fog here and there, but this is a little bit peculiar, and I was beginning to get really anxious about it. So I'm like, okay, guys. I'm like, the fog seems strange. I'm not accustomed to fog just coming in off of the mountains instead of out of the ocean. So with that and the sulfur smell, let's go ahead and make a organized way back to the car, and not panic and not run or do anything like that, and just make our way down. And so as we keep going down the hill, we're getting closer. And so there was a cattle guard at the one gate that you used to get in, and then there's like a dirt path, and then another cattle guard that's just out in the open. And as we're coming down the hill, and that's like coming up in the distance, like, we turn and like we look back, and the fog bank is still coming down the hill, and you can still like smell the sulfur like coming in from wherever. And that's when Brandon says, fuck it, and he starts running. So Josh starts running, and then I start running after both of them, and we charge down the hill, and we reach the cattle guard, and Brandon vaults over it as quick as he could and stops on the other side. And I look at Brandon, I'm like, Brandon, why are you stopping? Like, because I'm like pulling ahead of him. I'm like making my way to the next guard, because like I figure if we're all running back to the car, might as well give in to the absolute panic that we were all feeling and get the fuck out of there. And I'm like, Brandon, like, why are you stopping? He's like, you can't cross the cattle guard. I'm just like, excuse me? He's like, that's what it's there for, right? And I'm like, this isn't like Sleepy Hollow. There's not going to be like a bridge that the Headless Horseman can't cross. I'm like, the cattle guard wasn't even there when he died, if this is even a Headless Horseman. And so we stop and we like turn and shine our flashlights back up. And it's at this point that there was like a reflective sign up that was warning you against like snakes or something like that. And that's when the fog bank just kind of like densely rolls in front of it, still making its way down the hill towards us. And we're just like, fuck this. So we turn and start like running again. Now I'm, pretty like lithe. So I'm keeping like pretty like up ahead. When, as I'm running, all of a sudden, something slams into the fencing on our right. So we walked up, and on our left was the Boy Scout camp fenced in. Now we're coming back down. It's on our right. So as I'm running, like all of a sudden something just slams in and like starts like shaking the fence, but there's nothing there. I put my hands up and slam on the brakes, and Josh runs right into my back with his knife. Just like I feel it, just kind of like, just dip, right like against my back. And I'm like, Josh, you stabbed me. I'm like, you stabbed me very lightly, but you stabbed me. He's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. He goes, what was that? He's like, was there a dog? And I'm like, oh, there's no dog. We just got to get back to the car. And so like, we collect ourselves, keep running. Now, as I'm getting close to the truck, Brandon is still hoofing it, and he hits his hip and like pulls the trigger and shoots me in the back. So I got stabbed in the back, then shot in the back. And I'm like, Brandon, you shot me. Like, this is why I told you not to bring guns along. And he's just like, I'm so sorry. He's just, we got to get out of here. And so I get to the truck first, and I pull the door open, and I go to leap inside, but I'm really bad at it, so I end up, like, smashing my head, like, directly into the door frame, and I'm just, like, I basically nearly knock myself out, and I, like, kind of, like, slump into the middle of the seat, and then, like, Brandon and Josh are getting in, and then Josh just, like, gets and just floors it out of there, and they're just like, are you okay, Chris? I'm like, I got stabbed. I just banged the hell out of my head. I'm like, Brandon shot me, and they're like, what the hell was that? And I'm like, I don't the fuck know, man. Like a bunch of fog, like there's sulfur. I'm just like, I didn't hear anything, but who the fuck knows what that was? There was the weird fucking like fence thing, like whatever the hell that was. And then, like, that evening, like, oh, man, they were, like, super duper, like, spooked about the idea that, like, maybe, like, you would collect ghosts like they were fucking shitty Pokemon, or, like, the Haunted Mansion where it's just like, oh, hitchhiking ghosts. Like, you went and just disturbed this Headless Horseman, so now he's going to come home and haunt you. Like, and it's just like, I don't think so, but, I guess we'll find out over the next few days, and then we'll have to like organize and be all like, I'm like, oh, what do you do when your house has become haunted by a ghost that you've tracked back, like stuck to your shoe? But anyway, so that was like the continuation of the first times that we ever went ghost hunting. If I remember to tell it next time, there was like a pretty good story about like some weird driving out in Ojai, and like, yeah, that was a weird time. Anyway, I'll tell that story next time, like when I get a chance to record another one. So hopefully y'all have been enjoying this and have been, getting something out of it. Who knows what. But so I guess I'll call it a night, because this is one of the longest ones yet, and I feel like I've barely told anything besides just a bunch of fucking walking up hills and spooky vampires and horseshit like that. Anyway, hopefully you're having a good day, a good night, good afternoon. Maybe this is like you're watching all of them in like single order. Like who cares? Whatever. Have a good night. Yeah. Bye. Yeah, got a